The rain began as a soft whisper against the rusted tin awnings of the old neighborhood, then slowly grew into a relentless downpour that soaked everything it touched, as if the night itself were trying to wash the world clean. Lena sat on the edge of her narrow bed, mending a torn jacket under the weak yellow glow of a lamp shaped like a crescent moon. The room was small but orderly, every object placed with care because space was a luxury she could not afford. The walls carried faint cracks like wrinkles, and the wooden floor creaked with every movement. Yet this place was her sanctuary, earned through long days of quiet struggle. She had learned early how to survive without complaining, how to stretch a loaf of bread across 3 meals, how to smile even when exhaustion pressed heavily on her chest. Outside, the streets emptied as people hurried home, seeking warmth and safety, while Lena prepared to sleep, unaware that the night had other plans for her. The knock came suddenly, sharp and unexpected, cutting through the sound of rain like a blade. Her heart skipped. No one ever came this late. For a moment, she considered pretending she hadn't heard it, but then the knock came again, firmer this time, followed by a small, hesitant voice asking if anyone was there. Lena wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders and approached the door, her fingers trembling as she turned the lock. When she opened it, cold air rushed in, carrying the smell of wet asphalt and danger. A tall man stood there, his dark coat drenched, water dripping from his hair, his expression calm but intense. Beside him was a little girl, no older than 7, hugging a faded teddy bear, her shoes soaked through, her lips pale from the cold. The man spoke politely, explaining they had nowhere to go for the night, that every hotel was full because of a festival in the city, that the storm had caught them unprepared. His voice was steady, controlled, as if fear was a language he had long forgotten. Lena's instincts screamed caution. Her world had taught her that strangers often carried hidden costs. Yet when the little girl looked up at her with tired eyes full of quiet hope, Lena felt something soften inside her. She remembered being that child once, standing in the rain with nowhere to hide. Without fully understanding why, she stepped aside and let them in. Inside, the warmth was modest but sincere. Lena handed them towels, apologizing for their thinness, and put a pot of soup back on the stove, embarrassed that it was all she had to offer. The man thanked her with a seriousness that felt heavier than simple gratitude, as if her kindness carried weight beyond this moment. The girl sat on the floor, carefully placing her teddy bear beside her, looking around the room with innocent curiosity, touching the lamp and smiling when it glowed brighter. She said it looked like a piece of the moon had fallen into the room, and Lena laughed, surprised by the sound of her own laughter after such a long day. As they ate, Lena noticed things she couldn't explain. The man's eyes never truly rested. They scanned corners, door frames, shadows, measuring distances without effort. His hands bore faint scars, not from labor, but from something sharper, more deliberate. Yet when he looked at his daughter, his entire posture changed, the hardness melting into something protective and almost fragile. He spoke little about himself, answering Lena's questions vaguely, saying only that they traveled often and that life sometimes demanded sudden changes. Lena shared small pieces of her own story, how her parents had passed, how she worked wherever she could, how she believed that doing one good thing a day kept bitterness away. The man listened intently, as if these simple truths were rare treasures. When it was time to sleep, Lena spread a thin mattress on the floor, apologizing again for the lack of comfort. The man insisted it was more than enough, remarking quietly that comfort was not found in luxury, but in peace, something many powerful people never truly had. Lena didn't understand the meaning behind his words, but they lingered in the air long after he said them. She lay on her bed, facing the wall, listening to the rhythm of the rain and the soft breathing of the child. Her mind replayed the night's events, questioning her decision, wondering if kindness was foolish in a world that often punished it. Yet beneath her worry was a strange sense of calm, as if she had done exactly what she was meant to do. Outside, somewhere beyond the rain-soaked streets, men searched, phones buzzed, and quiet orders were being given. But within those cracked walls, there was only a poor young girl, a stranger, and his daughter sharing warmth for one night. Lena closed her eyes, unaware that this simple act would ripple far beyond her fragile room, touching a life built on power, fear, and secrets, and that by morning, nothing would ever be quite the same again. Morning arrived quietly, as if the storm had exhausted itself and left the city in a fragile, uncertain peace. Pale light slipped through the thin curtains, settling on the walls and the worn wooden floor, revealing dust motes drifting like tiny stars. Lena woke before the alarm she rarely used, her body trained by years of early work and late nights. For a brief second she forgot about the strangers, then she heard a soft clink of porcelain and realized she was not alone. The man was already awake, standing near the small stove, carefully pouring water into a kettle as though even this simple action required discipline. He turned when he sensed her presence, offering a polite nod and a faint smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Lena felt embarrassed that he was helping in her kitchen, but he insisted, saying mornings were easier when hands stayed busy. The little girl soon followed, patting across the floor in oversized socks Lena had offered the night before, her teddy bear tucked securely under her arm. She greeted Lena with a bright smile, as if they were old friends rather than strangers who had met in the rain. Lena made tea and sliced the last piece of bread into careful portions, apologizing for the simplicity, but the man thanked her again, repeating that generosity was measured by intention, not abundance. As they ate, the girl chatted freely, telling Lena about places she had seen through car windows and hotel lobbies, about always packing quickly and leaving quietly. There was a practiced normality in her words that made Lena's chest tighten. When the child mentioned her mother, the man gently placed a hand on her shoulder, and the conversation shifted without explanation, leaving a silence that felt heavy but respectful. From the corner of her eye, Lena noticed the man glance repeatedly toward the window, his attention sharpening whenever a sound came from the street below. She followed his gaze and saw a sleek black car parked near the curb, its engine humming softly, its windows tinted too dark for comfort. The man's posture changed instantly, every muscle coiling beneath his calm exterior. He stepped closer to the window, then just as quickly guided his daughter away, positioning himself between her and the outside world. Lena felt a chill crawl up her spine, sensing danger without understanding its shape. She asked if everything was all right, and after a brief pause, the man replied that sometimes the past had a habit of catching up, but that it would pass. Moments later, the car drove away, leaving behind nothing but unease and unanswered questions. The man apologized for the tension, offering Lena a thick envelope filled with money, far more than she had ever held at once. Her eyes widened in shock, and she immediately pushed it back toward him, shaking her head. She told him she hadn't opened her door for profit, that kindness lost its meaning when it expected payment. For the first time since she had met him, the man looked truly unsettled. His expression cracked, revealing surprise, then something like respect. He slowly put the envelope away, saying quietly that people like her were becoming rare, worn down by a world that rewarded cruelty more often than compassion as they prepared to leave. Lena helped the girl tie her shoes, noticing how carefully the child watched her, memorizing small gestures as if collecting pieces of normal life. The girl hugged Lena tightly, her small arms wrapping with surprising strength, and whispered thank you as though it were a secret promise. The man stood by the door, observing the scene with an intensity that suggested he was storing this moment somewhere deep within himself. He thanked Lena once more, his voice low and sincere, and told her that one day she might understand how much her kindness mattered. Lena smiled politely, assuming it was just another polite farewell exchange between people who would never meet again. She watched them descend the stairs and disappear into the morning, the echo of their footsteps lingering longer than expected. When she closed the door, the apartment felt emptier, yet heavier, as if something invisible had been left behind. The rest of the day passed strangely. Lena went about her usual routine, delivering repaired clothes and searching for more work, but she felt an unexplainable tension following her, like a shadow just out of sight. People on the street seemed to look at her twice, then quickly look away. In the afternoon, she noticed the same black car from the morning parked across the road from the tailor shop below her apartment. Fear tightened her chest, and she considered turning back, but before she could act, the car drove off again, leaving her with pounding heartbeats and unanswered fears. That evening, as she walked home, a group of men blocked her path, their smiles sharp and unwelcome. They made crude remarks, confident in their numbers, in the absence of anyone who might intervene. Lena's courage wavered, her mind racing for escape, when a familiar voice cut through the tension, calm and commanding. The man from the storm stepped out of the shadows, his presence alone enough to drain the color from their faces. They retreated without a word, fear replacing arrogance in an instant. Lena stood frozen, realization crashing over her like ice water. Whispers followed him from nearby onlookers, a single word repeated with reverence and terror, and in that moment Lena understood that the stranger she had sheltered was no ordinary man. He was someone whose name carried power, whose world was built on fear and control. As he turned to her, apologizing softly for the danger brushing against her life, Lena struggled to reconcile the gentle father with the figure of authority the street recognized. The truth settled heavily in her chest, and she realized that the night she had opened her door, she had unknowingly crossed into a world far beyond her own, and there would be no turning back from the knowledge she now carried. The air felt different after that encounter, heavier, as if the city itself had become aware of Lena in a way it never had before. She walked home slowly that night, every shadow stretching longer than usual, every distant footstep sounding closer than it should. Her small apartment no longer felt like a simple shelter, but a fragile island surrounded by unseen currents. Sleep refused to come easily. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw the man's calm expression on the street, the way fear had drained from the faces of those men without a single threat being spoken. By morning, exhaustion clung to her, yet life offered no pause. She forced herself into routine, believing that normalcy could anchor her to the world she understood. But normal no longer fit. Subtle changes followed her everywhere. Strangers held doors open with unusual respect. Shopkeepers greeted her with cautious politeness. And once, she noticed a man across the street speaking quietly into an earpiece before turning away. Lena tried to convince herself she was imagining things, that fear had sharpened her awareness. But deep down she knew something fundamental had shifted. That afternoon, the man appeared again, not from shadows this time, but in plain daylight, standing near the tailor shop with his daughter by his side. The child ran toward Lena the moment she saw her, smiling with the same warmth as before, as if the darkness surrounding her father did not exist. The man asked if they could talk somewhere private. Lena led them upstairs, her heart pounding with every step. Inside the apartment, he spoke openly for the first time. He told her he was a man who had built his life in a world where mercy was considered weakness, where survival demanded control and fear. He did not use titles or names, but he did not need to. Lena understood. He explained that after that night, he could not ignore what she had done. Kindness given without expectation was a language he barely remembered, yet it echoed louder than any threat he had ever made. He admitted that by letting him inside her home, she had unknowingly placed herself under the watchful eyes of people who monitored his movements. He apologized for that burden, his voice steady but sincere, and offered her protection, wealth, a chance to escape poverty with a single decision. The room felt smaller as his words settled in the air, heavy with possibility and danger. Lena listened quietly, her hands clasped tightly together. She thought of all the nights she had gone to sleep hungry, of the dreams she had buried because survival came first. The offer tempted her, not out of greed, but out of fatigue. Yet when she looked at the little girl sitting cross-legged on the floor, drawing with a broken pencil, something inside Lena refused to bend. She told the man she did not want her life reshaped by fear, even fear borrowed from power. She said that what she had done that night was simple, human, and that accepting his offer would change its meaning. The man studied her face for a long moment, as if measuring a force he could not command. Finally, Lena made a request of her own. She asked him not for money or protection, but for a promise that his daughter would grow up far from violence, far from the world that required men like him to exist. The silence that followed felt endless. The man's expression hardened, then softened, then broke into something raw and unguarded. He admitted that this was the one thing he feared he might not be able to give, yet it was the one thing he wanted most. Days turned into weeks, and the city whispered of changes. Deals were broken, alliances shifted, and names once spoken in fear began to disappear from conversations. Lena watched from the edges, unaware of the full scale of what was happening, but she felt the ripples. The men who had harassed her never returned. The landlord who threatened eviction suddenly became cooperative, offering repairs and apologies without explanation. Lena suspected the man's influence but noticed he kept his distance, honoring her boundaries. Occasionally, the little girl visited with a small gift or a drawing, each one filled with ordinary happiness that felt precious. Lena sensed that the man was fighting battles she would never see, not only against rivals, but against the life he had built for himself. One evening, he returned alone, his face tired, lines etched deeper than before. He told Lena he had begun dismantling parts of his own empire, handing control to others, closing doors that could never be reopened. He said enemies would see this as weakness, that danger would follow, but that for the first time, his choices were guided by something other than survival. Lena did not praise him or judge him. She simply listened, understanding that change rarely came without cost as he prepared to leave. The man thanked her once more, not with words of debt, but with quiet acknowledgement. He told her she had reminded him of who he might have been in another life, one not shaped by violence and fear. Lena watched him go, knowing their paths were diverging. That night, she sat alone by her moon-shaped lamp, reflecting on how a single act of kindness had reached into the darkest corners of another person's world. She did not know how his story would end, whether redemption was truly possible for someone who had lived so long in shadow. But she knew this. Even power built on fear could be shaken by compassion, and even a poor young girl could stand firm in the presence of it without losing herself. Time moved forward with a strange mixture of calm and tension, as if the city itself was holding its breath. Lena felt it in the way mornings arrived softer than before, in how the streets near her apartment seemed cleaner, quieter, almost cautious. She continued her work, reopening the small tailor shop beneath her room with borrowed tools and repaired machines, stitching torn clothes for neighbors who had long trusted her hands. Word spread quickly, and soon people came not only for repairs but for conversation, for a place that felt safe. Lena never spoke about the man or his world, yet she sensed that unseen walls had been placed around her life, not as a prison, but as a shield. Weeks later, a plain envelope appeared beneath her door with no name and no return address. Inside were legal documents written in careful language, transferring ownership of the building to her name, along with funds designated for renovation and community use. Lena's hands shook as she read, her heart pounding with disbelief and fear. She understood immediately who it was from, and she also understood the weight of accepting it. For a long time, she sat on the floor, the papers spread around her like fragments of another life, questioning whether this was still kindness or the beginning of dependence. In the end, she chose to accept it not as a gift of power, but as a responsibility. She repaired the building, reopened the shop fully, and offered free services to those who truly needed them, turning wealth born from shadows into something that served light. Far away, the man's world was unraveling by choice and by force. Old allies questioned his decisions, rivals tested his limits, and violence brushed dangerously close to his daughter more than once. Yet each time, he pulled further back, cutting ties, dismantling routes, erasing systems he himself had built. He moved his daughter to a quiet place where her name meant nothing and her laughter could exist without fear. At night, when exhaustion weighed heavily on him, he remembered Lena's small apartment, the thin soup, the warmth that cost nothing. He realized that power had never given him peace, but that one night of shelter had shown him what peace could feel like. The memory guided him through losses and threats, through moments when retreat felt more dangerous than war. He began to understand that true control was not domination, but restraint. Months later, Lena received another letter, this one lighter, filled with a child's handwriting and drawings. The little girl wrote about school, about a friend she had made, about a lamp in her new room shaped like a star. She thanked Lena for being brave and kind, saying her father smiled more now. Lena pressed the letter to her chest, tears slipping down her face, feeling a connection that transcended distance and circumstance. She replied carefully, encouraging the girl to dream freely, to choose kindness without fear. Lena did not ask about the man's life or his battles. Some things were better left unsaid, allowed to heal in silence. The neighborhood began to change. Crime faded quietly, not with dramatic arrests or headlines, but with absence. Threats dissolved, and people who once lived cautiously began to breathe easier. Lena became a quiet center of this transformation, not through authority, but through consistency. She listened, helped, repaired, and reminded others that dignity did not require wealth. Some nights, she stood by her window, watching the city lights, aware that her life had brushed against immense darkness and survived unchanged in its essence. She had not become powerful in the way the world defined it, yet her influence was undeniable. One evening, long after the storm that started everything had faded into memory, Lena heard a familiar knock. When she opened the door, she found the man standing alone, older somehow, lines deeper, posture lighter. There were no guards, no tension in his eyes. He said he was passing through, that he wanted to see her once more before leaving the city for good. They spoke quietly, sharing tea, not as benefactor and beneficiary, not as ruler and subject, but as two people who had changed each other without intending to. He told her he had stepped away completely, that others now carried the weight of choices he no longer wished to make. He said his daughter was safe, truly safe, and that for the first time, he did not wake each morning expecting war. Lena listened, feeling a quiet relief settle in her chest. When he stood to leave, he did not offer anything, not even promises. He simply thanked her for reminding him that his life was still his to choose. After he left, Lena stood in the doorway for a long time, the city air cool against her face. She knew she would never see him again, and she was at peace with that. Her life continued, rooted in simplicity, strengthened by purpose. Years later, people would speak of a powerful man who vanished before his empire could consume him, and of a neighborhood that transformed without knowing why. Lena would smile at such stories, returning to her work, knowing the truth was far quieter. It was the truth that a poor young girl opened her door on a rainy night, expecting nothing, and in doing so, altered the course of lives bound by fear and power. She learned that compassion did not need recognition, that courage could exist without force, and that sometimes the greatest change began with a single night of shelter, given freely, without knowing who stood in the rain.